Welcome back to another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. This is your host, Russell Bruce. And today we're going to come to you with a quick episode here dealing with the colonization of Liberia by free Black Americans. So this is something that definitely was not taught in schools, it wasn't taught in the collegiate system. It's something that, if you want to learn about it, you're going to have to find it on your own. And in my sojourn and searching for my genealogy, I stumbled across so many different things, and I've been trying to share them with you guys as we go, in hopes that it may help somebody else actually find their family or just find yourself in the history of these stories, right? We hear of the American Revolution, the Civil War, War of 1812, the Seminole Wars, the Gullah Geechee War. We hear of all these wars and stories and everything. And it's like your people were tied to some of these stories, and everybody's story may not be the same. So that's why I like to share these stories. So what we're going to do, let's jump into this one. Once again, this one's going to be dealing with the colonization of Liberia, which is on the west coast of Africa. So many of you, if you don't know, there was something that was formed in 1816 called the American Colonization Society. And the Colonization Society was an organization founded in 1816, and it was encouraged to the resettlement of free Black people and emancipated slaves to Africa. All right. The ACS was founded in Washington, D.C. by Robert Finley, a Presbyterian minister from New Jersey. The society's original name was the Society for the Colonization of Free People of Color of America. And here are what the goals were, or at least what they say the goals were, right? Addressing the growing number of free Black people in the United States, to provide an alternative to emancipation in the United States, to spread Christianity to Africa, to gradually end slavery. So at the end of the day, what it was is that you've seen all these free people popping up, especially in the 13 colonies in places like Virginia. And, they were outnumbering the Europeans who were here, who were trying to gain power. And a lot of these free people of color were landowners, and one of the things we could look at to tell that is, even by 1830, based upon this documentation here, let me see if I could pull it up for you guys. Free Negro owners of slaves in the United States in 1830s. And this here was written by Carter G. Woodson, right? Who was the founder of Free Negro Week, or Black History Week that later became Black History Month, was founded by Carter G. Woodson, right? And he was also the author of The Miseducation of the Negro. So during these particular time periods, slavery doesn't end to 1865. So people were wanting to get these slaves out of the way because there were starting to be uprisings, like, say, for example, Nat Turner. That particular uprising took place in the 1820s in Virginia. And they didn't want all these free people there because they felt that it would interfere with what they were doing with the slaves. Like, it would give them a safe haven to run to. They might collaborate or what have you. So at this point in time, you had people who were saying, hey, like, why don't we get them to go to like Africa? And they found a place in Liberia. And here's the story. So let me jump right into this. Here's a good one that I found on Backstory Africa that's pretty short, but it gives a lot of the meat and potatoes of what actually transpired.
Liberia, a small West African nation, is often overlooked in the annals of history. Yet, it holds a singularly remarkable legacy in the world. It was founded by freed slaves from the United States. Keep watching as we embark on a fascinating journey through time, tracing the footsteps of the freed slaves who founded Liberia. Along the way, we shall uncover the challenges they faced, the achievements they accomplished, and the lasting legacy they left behind. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps our channel grow and allows us to make more videos like this one. The seeds of Liberia's founding were sown in the early 19th century when the American Colonization Society was established in the United States. This organization aimed to create a colony in Africa for freed slaves who faced discrimination and marginalization in their homeland. The ACS, as it was also known, believed that by resettling these individuals in Africa, they would be able to enjoy greater freedom and opportunities while also promoting the gradual abolition of slavery in the United States. In 1820, the first group of freed slaves set sail from the United States, bound for the shores of West Africa. The voyage was fraught with peril and hardship, as these pioneers faced not only the dangers of the open sea, but also the uncertainties of their new lives in a foreign land. By 1847, some 300 black settler families from the United States had set up an independent republic. For more than 100 years, from 1877 to 1980, Liberia was governed under a one-party system in which the same party, the True Whig Party, controlled by the same elite group, held office continuously, dispensing patronage, deciding on public appointments, and retaining a monopoly on power, a record equaled by no other political party anywhere in the world. Elections were nevertheless taken seriously, if only to determine which family emerged on top. Namely, the Barclays, the Kings, or the Tubmans. As members of a ruling aristocracy, the Americo-Liberians, as they called themselves, were immensely proud of their American heritage. They developed a lifestyle reminiscent of the antebellum South, complete with top hats and mourning coats and Masonic lodges. They built houses with pillared porches, gabled roofs, and dormer windows resembling the 19th century architectural styles of Georgia, Maryland, and the Carolinas. They chose as a national flag a replica of the American Stars and Stripes, with a single star, and used the American dollar as legal tender. Just like white settlers in Africa, the Americo-Liberians constructed a colonial system subjugating the indigenous population to rigid control and concentrating wealth and privilege in their own hands. Despite their origins as descendants of slaves from the Deep South, they regarded Black Liberians as an inferior race, fit only for exploitation. The nadir of Americo-Liberian rule came in 1931 when an international commission found senior government officials guilty of involvement in organized slavery. When other West African states shed colonial rule in the 1960s, the Liberian system stayed much the same. Liberian law stipulated that only property owners were entitled to the vote, so the vast majority of indigenous Africans were effectively left without one. Small numbers were assimilated into the ranks of the ruling elite, country boys adopted by coastal families, girls selected as wives or concubines, or ambitious hinterlanders climbing the ladder. During the 1970s, a few were co-opted into government. Local administration in the hinterland was largely run by indigenous officials. But essentially, Liberia remained an oligarchy where 1% of the population controlled the rest, some 2 million people. The last of the line of Americo-Liberian presidents was William Tolbert, the grandson of freed South Carolina slaves who had served as vice president for 20 years. A Baptist minister, he attempted a series of cautious reforms, abandoning the top hat and tailcoat traditions favored by his predecessor, William Tubman, selling the presidential yacht and abolishing a compulsory tithe of 10% of every government employee's salary that went to the True Whig Party. But much of Tolbert's efforts were also devoted to amassing a personal fortune and promoting the interests of family members in the traditional manner. One brother was appointed Minister of Finance, another was chosen a President of the Senate, a son-in-law served as Minister of Defense, other relatives filled posts as ministers, ambassadors, and presidential aides. Economic development in the 1960s and 1970s helped underpin the system, as well as provide new opportunities for the elite's self-enrichment. The mainstay of the economy had initially been rubber. In 1926, the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company leased 1 million acres for 99 years at 6 cents an acre to meet the American demand for car tires. Today, the Firestone plantation remains one of the largest rubber plantations in the world. But iron ore exports from massive, high-grade deposits in the Bomi Hills then overtook rubber as the major source of foreign investment and government income. By 1970, Firestone and the Liberian Iron Mining Company were providing the government with 50% of greatly increased revenues. A third source of income came from registration fees from the world's largest ghost fleet of ships. Liberia possessed only 2 ships of its own, but allowed more than 2,500 vessels plying the seas to fly Liberia's flag of convenience without the bother of inspection for a suitable fee. Liberia's economic advances, however, served only to highlight the growing disparity between the ostentatious lifestyle of the rich elite and the overwhelming majority of impoverished tribal Africans. In 1979, the same year that Tolbert spent an amount equivalent to half the national budget while acting as host to an OAU Heads of State Conference, demonstrators took to the streets in protest against a 50% increase in the price of rice, the staple food of most Liberians. The price increase had been authorized by Tolbert in the hope of encouraging local production. But since one of the chief beneficiaries was the president's cousin, Daniel Tolbert, who owned the country's largest rice importing firm, it was seen as another move to enrich the elite. On Tolbert's orders, armed police and troops opened fire on the demonstrators, killing dozens of them. In the following months, Tolbert struggled to contain a rising tide of discontent, colliding not just with the poor, but with a new generation of the educated elite. He allowed the formation of an opposition party, but when opposition politicians called for a general strike, he had them arrested on charges of treason and sedition and banned the party. On the night of April 12, 1980, a group of 17 dissident soldiers, led by a 28-year-old master sergeant named Samuel Doe, scaled the iron gate of the president's 7-story executive mansion, overpowered the guards, and found Tolbert in his pajamas in an upstairs bedroom. They fired 3 bullets into his head, gouged out his right eye, and disemboweled him. His body was dumped in a mass grave along with 27 others who died defending the palace. Ministers and officials were rounded up, taken before a military tribunal, and sentenced to death. Amid much jubilation, watched by a crowd of thousands laughing and jeering, and filmed by camera crews, 13 high-ranking officials were tied to telephone poles on a beach in Monrovia and executed by a squad of drunken soldiers, firing volley after volley at them. A great shout arose from the mob. At his first press conference, Sergeant Doe strode into the ballroom of the executive mansion wearing a wide-brimmed Army Ranger hat, crisply pressed fatigues, and combat boots. He carried a ceremonial sword, a Magnum revolver, and a walkie-talkie radio. In faltering English, he read a prepared statement, handled 2 brief questions, and then sat down. Sergeant Doe was then the youngest and lowest-ranking soldier to seize power in Africa. He was what Americo-Liberians called a country boy, a semi-literate tribesman with only basic education and limited intelligence. What inspired Doe and his group of fellow conspirators to storm the executive mansion was not a plan for revolution, but simply grievances over poor living conditions in army barracks. They possessed no political objectives, no policy ambitions, no guiding ideology, other than to set themselves up in power. A new era of rule in Liberia had begun, one which would eventually become a brutal military dictatorship.
All right, so that gives you a little brief introduction into what actually transpired, right? So here's something else that I think is of interest, right? The first 10 presidents of Liberia were Black Americans. And one that many of you probably seen, if you've seen any, was Joseph Jenkins Roberts. And here's a little info on him. Joseph Jenkins Roberts, he was born March 15th, 1809, and he died February 24th, 1876. He was an American merchant who immigrated to Liberia in 1829, where he became a politician, elected as the first and the 7th president of Liberia. So he served twice, right? First time 1848 to 1856, second time from 1872 to 1876. And he was first man of African descent to govern the country, serving previously as governor from 1841 to 1848. He returned to office following the 1871 Liberian coup d'etat. Born free in Norfolk, Virginia, Roberts immigrated as a young man with his mother, siblings, wife, and child to the young African colony. He opened up a trading firm in Monrovia and later engaged in politics. Something else that I read on this also, it mentions that he went with his family, right? His mother, siblings, children, and his wife, if I'm not mistaken, like his wife and a couple of his children died. So one of the things that was happening, some 25 to 30% of the people who immigrated to Africa, to Liberia, ended up within the first year dying of malaria. So they were getting bit by mosquitoes and dying off from malaria. So this sojourn, it wasn't as easy as many would probably, lead people to believe. And I'm not sure what they told the people who would come later, knowing that this was happening. Second guy we have here is Stephen Allen Benson. He was a Liberian politician who served as second president in Liberia from 1856, 1864. Prior to that, he served as third vice president, of Liberia from 1854 to 1856 under Joseph Jenkins Robert, who was the first one I showed you. And he was born in the United States. Also, Benson was born in Dorchester County, Maryland. And you'll see, as it goes on, I'll read another one here that, 9 times out of 10, they served in the cabinet of the prior president. Daniel Bashel Warner, he served as third president of Liberia from 1864 to 1868. Prior to this, he served as the third Secretary of State in the cabinet, Joseph Jenkins Robert, who was the first president from 1854 to 1856. And he was the fifth vice president of Liberia under the president, Stephen Allen Benson, from 1860 to 1864. So you can see he was involved in the first two presidencies as well. And, it goes on. And, at your leisure, you could pull these things up and read, but you could see this guy here, born in Richmond, Virginia, James Spriggs Payne. Edward James Roy was from Ohio. James Smith was from Carolina, South Carolina. Anthony Gardner, Southampton, Virginia. Alfred Russell, Lexington, Kentucky, and so on, right? So if you take a look at these names, you'll see that they have English names. They came from America. So after the civil wars that took place in 1980, some of the descendants decided to return back to America. And you'll see that, they were no longer considered as American at that point. They considered them as African. And today, a lot of people, when they do their genealogy, they'll see that they have blood ties to some of these African nations that are on the West Coast, such as Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, but if you study the history of it, like even say Sierra Leone, for example, there were a lot of Black Brits who were being taken into Sierra Leone, as early as the 12th century. And during the times of the Moors, of their conquest, they were just moving a lot of people around too. But let's stick to Liberia here. So something else I find interesting. So they mentioned William Tolbert and how he was a lavish spender during his reign. And he was not born in America, but he was second generation. So William Tolbert was actually a junior. His father, William Sr., came from America. So they referred to, these American descent Liberians as Amerigo Liberians. So here's something of interest. Tolbert served around, can't remember where he went, what year he actually went in. I don't have that here in front of me right now. I thought I had it saved. But in 1972, he had the Gremlin Tiger Marching Band come and perform at the inauguration. So this is big. This is something that wasn't taught in our history books here in America. So, anybody ever been to a HBCU halftime show? Remarkable entertainment, second to none at any collegiate level. So I find this very interesting that, William Tolbert was a descendant of Virginia, but they knew of the marching band in Grambling, which is perhaps the best between them and Southern. Those are the two that come to the top of mind. But so these are just a few things I wanted to share. Definitely look into it. So Liberia, the west coast of Africa, was a colony of free Black Americans back in the 1800s, prior to slavery ending. And still to this day, there are many, about 5% of the population of Liberia are American descent. So something to look into, a part of the history that, we don't see in the history books, but definitely something of importance to Black Americans, of course. And once again, I'll continue to share more information as it comes. And until next time, peace.